Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi.
I'm Emma.
This week, you have likely seen a lot of headlines about Kamala Harris.
The woman of the moment, Kamala Harris, has just arrived.
Momentum is growing for US Vice President Kamala Harris.
This is going to be a great week.
The Democratic National Convention, also known as the DNC, has been going on in Chicago this week. Over the last few days, we have seen Kamala Harris accept her party's formal nomination to run as its presidential candidate ahead of the US election in November. For that reason, there has been a lot of attention on Harris this week. But what about Donald Trump? What is the latest with him? In today's deep dive, we're going to tell you the latest on the US election.
Billi, it has been a very big week in US politics. It's been a very big year in US politics, but things are really ramping up now as we head towards the November election. Where are we at? What is the latest on all things US politics?
All right, so I'll set the scene. So like you said, the election is in November. It's on the 5th of November. It's always on the first Tuesday of November every 4 years. And so that means that we are about 2.5 months out from when everyone will be going to the polls.
That's quite scary. I feel like we've always spoken about this election as a very far away concept because we have been talking about it for so long, but 2.5 months is really not that long.
No, it's right around the corner. And so it has now been formally confirmed that the race will be between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Obviously, there was the debacle with Joe Biden being the incumbent president, but he eventually stepped down to make way for Kamala Harris in July, which is only a month ago. It feels like that was a long time ago. So this is Trump's third consecutive time running for president, which no one has actually done since Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had a little bit more success than Trump. He was actually elected to 4 terms as president in the 1930s and 1940s. Obviously, you can't do that anymore. Presidents can only have 2 terms, so 8 years in total. Now, in terms of what has actually happened recently, the last time we spoke about the election on this podcast, we were discussing who we thought Kamala Harris would choose as her vice presidential pick. Now, since then, she has announced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. He is the guy who's credited with coming up with this strategy that a lot of high-profile Democrats have adopted of calling Trump and his vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, weird.
Have you ever seen the guy laugh? That seems very weird to me that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior.
Now, in terms of news around Donald Trump, yesterday he held his first outdoor rally since the assassination attempt. And he did that from behind bulletproof glass. We posted a photo of that on the Daily Aus if you want to see it.
And this bulletproof glass that we saw him speak behind, the FBI announced earlier in the week that pretty much that is going to be the standard for the rest of the campaign. So you're not going to see Trump speaking at an outdoor event without that glass, obviously in the wake of the assassination attempt last month.
And commentators in the US have suggested that he has kind of been struggling to find his footing since Biden dropped out and Harris became the Democratic nominee. Obviously, they had this whole strategy because they thought that he was running against Biden, and now it basically just changed overnight. He obviously hasn't acknowledged any kind of struggle, and his camp have completely denied that he is struggling in any way or that he's faced any setbacks. But that has been a large part of the commentary over the recent weeks.
Yeah, you couldn't avoid the Trump strategy pre-Biden dropping out, which was all about Biden's age, whether or not he was competent, whether he was fit to run again. And now that we've got a Democrat nominee who is young and fit, that argument no longer holds up. So let's go to Harris now, Billi. How has this week panned out in the world of Kamala Harris?
It has been a big week for Harris. As I said in the intro, the DNC has been going on, and that's the party's huge convention where delegates vote for their preferred presidential and vice presidential nominees, which is basically just a fancy way of saying they just formally elect Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, as their nominees. Now, so far this week, we have heard from Michelle Obama.
I want to know who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs.
We've also heard from Barack Obama. One of my favorite headlines that I saw was that Michelle Obama's husband also spoke at the DNC.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling fired up.
There was also Hillary and Bill Clinton. Yesterday, we also saw Oprah Winfrey. There was also rapper Lil Jon, which it was just very funny.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to officially nominate Kamala Harris for president. Daily Aus, another round of shots. DNC, turn out for what?
Yeah, the DNC has been larger than life. It's such a uniquely American moment in politics. Like, you would never see that kind of hype for an Australian federal election. But it's honestly like the Super Bowl halftime show meets some kind of like Madison Square Garden arena tour performance. It's so extra.
It's a big event. We also saw John Legend perform. So, yeah, there have been some very high-profile guests throwing their support behind Kamala Harris.
So the Democratic National Convention underway or wrapping up over the coming days. But of course, the Republican convention had already happened. How does the DNC compare to what the RNC looked like?
Yeah, when you just said that the DNC felt like this larger-than-life event, I have to say the Republican convention had a very similar vibe. So that was a month ago. You might remember the photos of Trump at the convention because it was when he came out with the bandage over his ear. It was the first time that we had seen him since his assassination attempt, and so there was a lot of anticipation about him coming out and seeing him for the first time. There was, of course, a lot of sympathy for Trump at the time. And as I said before, I think it's fair to say that it had this similar kind of rock star energy.
It's almost like a Hillsong convention or something. It's like there's quite a religious energy.
Yes. And that was a word that came up a lot at the Republican convention, that it almost felt like Trump had this like God-like aura around him.
And then everyone started wearing the bandages on the ear in the fashion trend that no one was expecting.
And that was something that Trump was trying to really lean into, you know, the fact that he survived this attempt on his life. He really painted himself as this hero that was quite successful at the time. And he also had high-profile people sharing their support for him. For example, there was television personality Amber Rose.
The truth is that the media has lied to us about Donald Trump.
He also had former Fox News host Tucker Carlson, and he also had Hulk Hogan, the retired wrestler.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you compare the celebrity appearances, I guess. On one camp, you've got Hulk Hogan, and the other, you have Oprah Winfrey. So really worlds apart.
Another thing to remember about the Republican convention is that at the time, Biden was Trump's opponent. And we all know how unpopular Biden was, not just with his own party and obviously with the Republican Party, but also with voters at large. The big conversation was that there just seemed to be no way that he could win this election. And so the story at the time was how unified Republicans were around Trump and how the Democrats were just in complete disarray and complete disagreement about Biden. Now, the polls were also showing at the time that Trump was ahead of Biden. Obviously, a lot has changed. First and foremost, there's a new nominee for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that there was so much conversation and criticism at the time being directed at Biden from senior Democrats, from voters and commentators everywhere about, you know, you have to make this decision for the good of the party. It's time. You should have walked away by now. But kind of reflecting, it's interesting looking back to the RNC, ultimately, strategically, it's kind of played out well for the Democrats in terms of the timing, that was really what the RNC was motivated by, this idea that Biden wasn't right for the job. Maybe the timing was more strategic for Biden. Maybe he was trying to do a favor for the party. But a lot has changed since then, as you mentioned, Billi. What else has changed?
So if we go back to a few days after the assassination attempt and before Biden stepped down, there was a few days in that period, the commentary was basically that Trump was the very likely winner. It almost seemed like this foregone conclusion.
That especially felt like the case after that first debate. Biden's performance in that first debate seemed to really be the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, that was a complete turning point. And since then, since Kamala Harris has become the nominee, there has been a groundswell of support for Harris and a real sense of unity around her that was completely missing from the Democrats a month ago.
What has Harris been able to bring to the party that Biden couldn't? What are the kind of key aspects to her turning it around in such a way?
I think that there have been a lot of factors, but one thing that I want to focus on is this idea of who in this election is the quote unquote change candidate. This idea that it's often smart for political candidates to position themselves as the person who will bring change to a country.
Interestingly, that's kind of the platform that Trump ran on back in 2016. If you think back to that election when he defeated Hillary Clinton, he was really positioned as this sort of change for America, that he was the anti-politician, that he had a whole career and life outside of politics, and that change somehow gave him a different lens or perspective than other leaders.
Exactly, and it was very successful for him back in 2016. And again, in this election, that is exactly what he was trying to do again. So when it was Trump versus Biden, obviously, Biden was the incumbent president. He's been the president for 3.5 years now. And it was easy for Trump to position himself as the person who will bring about change to America. And now with Harris, still, Trump's campaign is trying to position her as the same as what we currently have, because she obviously is the current vice president and, like Biden, has been there for 3.5 years. But Harris is really trying to position herself as this quote-unquote change candidate. She's trying to say that, you know, to the voters, if you're tired of the political era that we have had for the past 8 years, she is the answer to that. And I guess one advantage that's very obvious that she has is that she does look like change. Even just the fact that, you know, she's a woman and she is 20 years younger than the people who have been running for president over the past 8 years. But like I said, I think Trump's camp is trying to remind voters that Harris has been the second most senior person in the Biden administration. And they're trying to say that if you're looking for change, she's not that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Kamala Harris is positioning herself as this change candidate and a potential new face after 8 years. It's 4 years of a Democrat leadership that she's referring to there, and the 4 years prior under a Republican presidency. So it's interesting she's kind of appealing to all sides of politics. It's like she's admitting maybe that it's okay if you're frustrated with the face of politics, whether or not that face is a Republican or a Democrat. I'm something else altogether. What are the actual polls telling us?
Look, I guess if you wanted to see an example of media bias, there is no clearer example than looking at how lots of different publications are covering this US election, and polls is no different. It literally depends on where you get your polls from. If you look at the New York Times, for example, the latest polls show that Harris is slightly in front of Donald Trump nationally and in some key swing states, including in Wisconsin and Michigan, but Trump is leading Harris or equal with her in some of the other swing states. But then if you look at Fox News, their poll says that Vice President Kamala Harris is behind Trump at a national level.
Fox News, which is historically a conservative, right-leaning news outlet, and the New York Times, which some conservatives have accused of being centre-left.
Yeah, and look, there are several other polls. A lot of them are very credible. I don't mean to undermine any of the polls. I think all of the polls are saying that this is an extremely tight race. That is undeniable. No one is saying that there is a landslide here. It's clear that no matter what, in November, at this stage, it looks like it will be very close. One thing to note is that the overall national vote is much less important than looking at the individual swing states. The swing states are those ones that can go either way, Democrat or Republican, each election. And these swing states are where US elections are won or lost because of the extremely tight margins that they swing either way each election. For example, Hillary Clinton actually famously won the national vote, so won the popular vote. If we look at everyone who voted in the US in 2016, she won that, but she lost the actual election because she didn't win enough of the key swing states.
So what you mean is Hillary Clinton, by population, won the majority of votes, but because the Electoral College works on a state basis, she did not win enough states.
Exactly.
So, Billi, now that all the hype is out of the way in terms of who the nominations will be, who are the candidates in the election, what are the big policy issues dominating this cycle?
I think there are three big ones. The first is the economy. As we know, there is a lot of concern at the moment about whether the US could be entering a recession. We saw the stock market crash just a few weeks ago, and so that has been a big policy issue. There's also been extremely high inflation. Just like Australia, the US has been battling rising prices. And Donald Trump particularly is going really hard on saying that the issues facing the economy are the fault of the Biden administration. And obviously, he's making the connection that Kamala Harris is the vice president of that administration. Harris's camp, on the other hand, is saying that Trump's policies will only make inflation higher. The second big policy issue is immigration. This is another one that Trump is going really hard on, particularly because Harris had the immigration portfolio in the Biden administration. And obviously we know that immigration has been one of the biggest policy agendas for Trump since he first decided that he was going to run for president.
The border czar, Kamala Harris, has allowed hordes of illegal alien criminals to literally stampede into our country. We're going to end that on day one. We're going to close our border. We're going to get all of the bad ones out.
And the last is reproductive rights. This is one that Harris is really focusing on. She is saying that she will change abortion rights in the US if she does become president. This has technically been a state issue since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, but clearly she believes that she can make some sort of a difference at a federal level.
We'll stop Donald Trump's extreme abortion bans because we trust women to make decisions about their own body.
And we do have some presidential debates in the calendar, 3 debates coming up ahead of the November vote. The first time that we're really going to see Trump and Harris go head to head. I presume those key policy areas will be under a microscope during those debates.
Yes, grab your popcorn. So the next US presidential debate will be on the 10th of September, which will be the 11th of September in Australia. It will be around mid-morning for us. It's in the calendar for everyone at the Daily Aus. We'll be having a group watching session. And so that will be the first time that we see Kamala Harris debate Donald Trump. Obviously, it didn't go too well for the Democrats last time when Biden was the opponent. So we will see how Harris goes with that.
Thanks, Billi. Put that in your calendars, everyone, the 11th of September. Thank you so much for breaking all of that down for us today, Billi, and bringing us up to speed. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Aus. Don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening to The Daily Aus podcast, or if you're watching over on our YouTube. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We will be back on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye.